at the heart of every conflict, at the heart of every battle, there is a scene, an act, or a place that defines the outcome of the battle. This past summer, our family had the opportunity to do some traveling. As I reflect back on our traveling, I think of three places, three scenes that determined or helped to determine the outcome of certain battles. The first one was actually an NFL locker room in Irving, Texas. Now, I know that at the top of most of your bucket lists is being able to visit the Dallas Cowboys locker room. Well, when we were in Texas this summer, my son and his father wanted to go. Well, who am I to argue with them? And so off we went. We went to Texas Stadium and we took the tour. Toward the end of the tour, they took us down into the locker room. The gentleman who was leading the tour showed us the place. I thought, this is awfully small. This is a small place to contain so many big bodies and larger egos. It wasn't that big. But he showed us around, showed us the lockers of some of the current players, showed us the lockers of some of the greats of Cowboys past. That's where Roger Staubach had his locker, and Emmitt Smith and Tony Dorsett. As we stood and looked around and were surprised at how small it was, I got to thinking about sports fans and the greats of sports history. As I think about those moments before a team emerges from the locker room to go do football battle on the field, I wonder what the coaches would answer to this question. If we were to ask them, when you stand here talking to your team, preparing to go out for the game, what are the defining characteristics that will determine the outcome of the game? I don't know what they would say. Tom Landry, Jimmy Johnson, Wade Phillips. I'm not sure. But I do have a sneaking suspicion that whatever they might say, they would use at least two words. I have a hunch that the two words, team and talent, would appear in their answer. I suspect that the coach would say, before we go out, I have to remind them that what we do as a team. And we have to put all of our talent to its best use. Team and talent. Maybe those are the factors that determine the outcome. There was a second place we visited. It wasn't too many miles from that place. It was the 6th floor museum, Dealey Plaza, where Lee Harvey Oswald is said to have crouched holding the gun that spewed the bullets that apparently killed John F. Kennedy. I say apparently because there are enduring questions. As we stood there by that 6th floor window and reflected back on a battle that one side didn't even yet know it was fighting, I wondered. I thought, I continue to wonder, what are the themes? What are the qualities that determine the outcome? I would once again have to go back to two. In this case, secrecy and violence. Secrecy, because you see, the secrecy that was there displayed continues to be the fertile soil in which grow the conspiracy theories all of these years later. And violence? Oh, make no mistake about it. All you have to do is sit and for a few seconds watch those frames of the Zapruder film to realize violence erupted that day. There was a third place. This one many miles from the first two. This one underground. This one was actually under the heart of the city of London. We descended the stairs into what had been the bunker called the War Rooms of Sir Winston Churchill. It was here in these small, cramped quarters that Churchill and his colleagues helped to mastermind the Allied victory in World War II. We wandered around looking at the place, pondering the secrecy, feeling the small space, and marveling at the fact that here in this place, minds were at work that would change the history of the world. In fact, it was here that that bulldog of a man presided, the one who literally galvanized the British people by his words. We listened to some of his speeches. We shall fight them, he said, on the seas. We shall fight them in the air. We shall fight to defend our island. We shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them in the fields. We shall fight them to the very end. And we shall never surrender. Galvanized a people. And I wonder, did we have the opportunity to speak to Churchill? What would he say were the qualities? I don't know what he would say. I know what I thought upon leaving. 2 qualities: leadership, courage. You see, every battle has a place, a scene, an act, some qualities that define the battle and determine its outcome. Whether you're talking about the football field or the literal battlefield, that is true for everyone. And so now I have a question for you. As Seventh-day Adventists, we have long said we are in the midst of a battle. We refer to it as the great controversy, that conflict between light and darkness, good and evil, Christ and Satan. So let me ask you, what are the realities, the scenes, the acts, the qualities that define this battle and will determine its outcome? I want to take you to 2 passages of Scripture this morning, one in the Old Testament, one in the New. The first one is in the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Isaiah, the 14th chapter. Here in Isaiah, the 14th chapter, Isaiah, the spokesperson for God, is speaking to the king of Babylon. But Christians have long realized that beneath that literal reality of the king of Babylon lurked another image, another being to whom God was speaking. Lucifer, son of the morning, son of the dawn. Notice these words in Isaiah, the 14th chapter, beginning with verse 12. God, through the prophet, says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Do you hear what that being says? I will ascend, I will go up, I will be the highest, up, up, up. That's where I'm headed. If I had to say, what are the qualities that characterize this being in this conflict, I would say 2. Climb and conquer. Climb and conquer. Up, up, up. I will be in control. But that's only one side. One side of this controversy we call great. There's another side and another passage. For this one, I invite you to turn to the New Testament letter to the Philippians. Philippians chapter 2. Here in Philippians, the 2nd chapter, we will read a hymn. At least some believe it was a hymn. Scholars are not certain whether it was Paul himself who penned these words or whether he borrowed them from someone else, but most are agreed they are among the most sublime words of all of Holy Writ. It is possible, in fact, that it is not actually a hymn, but merely a shining example of the poetic language which the great apostle could employ to try to describe things that were indescribable. Right here, he says, we are going to see into the very mind of Christ. Now remember, John tells us that Jesus said, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." Because of that, when we take this glimpse into the mind of Christ, we know that in reality, we are gazing into the very heart of God. So Philippians, the second chapter, beginning with verse 5. Paul writes, "Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." Magnificent language. And so I rushed into the elevator in a bit too big of a hurry, and as soon as the doors began to close, was looking for the right button to push. I needed to go up. It was only then that I realized that one of the persons already on the elevator had pushed the button for a lower floor, and we were headed down. They could see that I was wanting to go up, and so somebody in the back of the elevator said, "Looks like the only way up is down." I almost said, "Don't get theological, I'm in a hurry." But before we rush away from that thought, linger over it. Ponder its reality. Because if I understand what Paul is saying here in Philippians 2, he is saying, if you want to see the other side of the battle, if you want to see the mind of Christ, the heart of God, you are going to have to go down. You are going to have to go much further down than you ever would have imagined. Because that is where you will see the mind of Christ, the heart of God. And going down is a hard thing to do. We're not accustomed to that. It seems like everywhere we turn in our life, we are accustomed to going up. When it comes to academia, we all desire to be top of the class. When it comes to business, we desire the corner office and the big paycheck. When it comes to sports, we want to be the ones at the end of the season holding forth the trophy. We are accustomed to going up. In fact, I think I have yet to hear a single person say, "So tell me, what do I need to do in this job to finally get to the least respected, lowest paying position? What do I have to do?" I've never heard a student, I've never had a student approach me in a classroom and say, "What do I need to do to end last in the class?" It just doesn't happen. Because most places in our lives, we are accustomed to going up. And so when we come to the spiritual life, when we come to the arena of the great controversy, we make this assumption that if we are to understand the mind of Christ, we too must go up. It's a kind of thinking that says the best and the highest and the brightest and the most winsome is that which most accurately defines and describes God. It's a thinking that is deeply embedded, it seems, in the human psyche. Take, for example, this description, this physical description of Jesus Christ, written by Publius Lentulus. Publius Lentulus was the governor that succeeded Pontius Pilate. Listen to the description he wrote of Jesus of Nazareth. "He is a tall man, well-shaped, and of amiable and reverend aspect. His hair is of a color that can hardly be matched, falling into graceful curls, parted on the crown of his head, running as a stream to the front after the fashion of the Nazarites. His forehead high large and imposing, his cheeks without spot or wrinkle, beautiful with a lovely red, his nose and mouth formed with exquisite symmetry, his beard of a color suitable to his hair, reaching below his chin and parted in the middle like a fork, his eyes bright blue and serene. Wow. Sounds like somebody that ought to run for president. Sounds like the very kind of person we would wish to follow. In fact, if you pause and think about it long enough, you end up saying it may sound like that, but what it doesn't sound like is what Isaiah said. You may remember those words in Isaiah 53 that Christians have long said pointed toward the Messiah. Those words where Isaiah says he had no comely form. He was not attractive. There was nothing in his outward appearance that drew us to him. So how do you reconcile the two? Well, you reconcile them by understanding that these words allegedly written by Publius Lentulus, were actually not written for another 1,500 years, right around the year 1514, forging Publius's signature. But why? Well, I can't get into the mind of the writer, but I can guess. There's just something in us that wants to be drawn upward, to the powerful, to the mighty, to the comely, to the winsome. Surely that's how he must have been. We're just not that keen on heading down to find him. It's an age-old struggle within the human heart and within this controversy. Do we take the up escalator or the down escalator? Last January, we had a week of devotion here in this church. A group of senior pastors of college and university churches across the North American division of Seventh-day Adventists came together to plan this series. We were excited about the opportunity of doing something together, excited about the prospect of preaching on the matchless charms of Christ. As we were planning, as I was making out the schedule, I received an interesting email from one of the pastors. Happened to be one of the pastors who, when that pastor spoke here, was one of the best sermons of the week. That pastor sent me an email that said, "Would you be so kind as to schedule me to preach at the meeting where you expect the lowest turnout? Would you schedule me where you expect the least amount of people?" Interesting. Especially because that email caused me to hearken back 2 or 3 years before that to a phone call that came to our office. My assistant at that time took the phone call. It was a well-known Adventist preacher. Wished to come and preach here at the university church. When my assistant hesitated and said, "I'm not sure if that would be possible," the person on the other line said, "I think I would be very good for your church. In fact, if I come and preach, I can guarantee you a crowd." And there you have it. Up and down. Please schedule me where you expect the least number. If I come, I'll bring you a crowd. It's the age-old battle. What we might not have expected is that it is that very kind of battle that rages at the heart of the great controversy. And that Jesus made a distinct choice. It's an unexpected choice. It would be like walking through a department store looking for the down escalator and only being able to find the up escalator. I need to go down. But everywhere I go, every department that happens to have an escalator, it's only headed up. Finally, we find somebody who works there and say, I need to go down. I can't find the down escalator. How do I get down? And the person looks a bit embarrassed and says, well, you know, it's funny you should ask. Nobody ever used that one, so we took it out. There is no down escalator. And we say, what? That's right. How do we go down? Well, I don't know. I guess the only way down is to head down the up escalator. Well, that's going to be a challenge. Oh, it will be. You mean we have to fight the flow? We have to exert, we have to somehow get down an escalator that's coming up? I guess so, says the employee. But take heart, I saw one who did it. Just follow his steps. Did you notice his steps in these words in Philippians? I count a number, maybe 6 different steps downward that Jesus took. Notice them again. It says he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Made himself nothing, taking the nature of a servant, made in human likeness, humbled himself as a human being to death, and even died on a cross. Down, 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 down he goes. And then when you lay that reality alongside the reality of Lucifer, who said, up, 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 I will go, you see the heart of the conflict. In fact, it is the New Testament scholar, Dr. Fred Craddock, who in one simple sentence defines it. He says this: the central event in the drama of salvation is an act of humble service. The central event in the drama of salvation is an act of humble service. In reality, there are 2 statements in that passage, 2 statements, which all of the others explain. First one, made himself nothing. Humility. Second one, became a servant. Served. So could it be that when we look into the heart of Lucifer, we see that the battle for him is defined by 2 concepts, climb and conquer, that when we look into the mind of Christ and the heart of God, what we there see is also 2 things. But in this case, those 2 realities are humility and service. Those are the realities that define for God this conflict. Now, one thing we have not taken notice of is the context in which Paul writes these words. The context is that the Philippian church is a divided church. We're not sure why they were divided. Scholars have wondered about that, have searched the epistle to try to understand why. Some have said maybe they're divided because of Euodia and Syntyche, the 2 women mentioned in chapter 4, who have come to loggerheads. They are fighting. Maybe the church is lined up behind each. And Paul is writing to a divided church that stand behind 2 leaders. Or maybe the source of the conflict are those people of Jewish descent who have infiltrated the Christian congregation at Philippi and have said, you must practice the traditions of the elders in order to even be Christian. Paul takes very serious offense with them. In fact, he goes so far as to call them mutilators of the flesh, dogs. Pretty harsh language. Maybe that's the source of the division in the Philippian church. Or maybe it's even that some feel like there are 2 groups, the one whom Paul loves and the rest of them. Maybe that's why Paul goes to such pains in the early verses of the epistle to say, I love all of you, all of you. Bottom line is we're not sure of the source of the conflict. But what we are sure of is this. The Philippian church is a divided church. A barrier stands between the groups. A conflict rages in their hearts. And then comes Paul, stepping into that conflict. And what does he do? He says, let me show you the mind of Christ, the heart of God. Let me show you the kind of God we serve. We serve a God who is characterized by humility and by service. And Paul just lays that down in front of them and then steps away because he knows, he understands what happens when beings, heavenly and earthly, see the heart of God. One commentary says it simply like this. Paul well knew that if those to whom he wrote could come to grasp the astounding sacrifice made for them, there would be no place for selfishness in their lives. And so in the midst of that conflict, Paul doesn't try to mediate, doesn't try to point out who's right, who's wrong. No, he simply says, people, look at the mind of Christ. Look at the heart of God. And when you look, you see Jesus on his way down the up escalator in humility and service. That kind of act stays with you. Listen to the words of Mike Hearn. He's a pastor at Christ Community Church, Illinois. He writes, while attending Moody Graduate School in Chicago, campus housing was not available for my wife and me, so we ended up renting an apartment right around the corner on fashionable Oak Street. One morning I noticed Shoo, S-H-O-O. I noticed Shoo, the local shoe shine man. Like a barker at a carnival, he would offer to shine the shoes of anyone for a donation, any bustling passerby during the early morning rush. On that particular day, however, a stretch limo pulled up in front of Shoo. And out of the vehicle stepped a gentleman dressed like a cover model for GQ magazine. Rather than asking for a shoe shine, though, he set Shoo down and polished his tattered and scuffed shoes. When he finished, he handed Shoo a tip, a $100 bill, and then returned to his vehicle, never saying a word. When I returned home that evening, my wife asked how my day at school had gone. I explained that on my way to class to learn about Jesus, I saw someone who acted a whole lot like Jesus. To this day, says Hearn, to this day, I cannot remember what I learned in theology class that particular day. But I have never forgotten the lesson I learned at the corner of Oak and Rush from Shoo and the man who acted a whole lot like Jesus. When you see that, you just don't forget it. And so to a church in conflict, Paul says, look at the mind of Christ. View the heart of God. At least I think he wrote that to a church in conflict. It could be that he wrote that to a universe in conflict. A universe where a great controversy raged. Maybe Paul wrote that to a universe, saying to every being in that universe, look, there's one heart that says, up, 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 climb and conquer. And another heart that goes down, down, down. Humility and service. That's the mind of Christ and the heart of God. Maybe that's why I liked that song from my earliest years, when we sat around as a family and sang. What the world needs is Jesus. Just a glimpse of him. It's enough to thrill my soul to this day. Because in that glimpse is the answer to the conflict.